defense, agriculture, some of these other things, and talk about cutting them as well. Secretary Gates has outlined $187 billion worth of cuts that won't impact those that are on the front lines, that are not going to impact those that are in harm's way, making sure that we're keeping our country safe. I think there could be some others as Leon Panetta goes over to the Defense Department. But this is, the vast other portion of it is going to be what they call mandatory spending. And so you've got Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the interest. The interest on our debt right now is about $1.2 billion a day. Our interest rates are fairly low. So as interest rates rise, the interest on that debt is going to become a bigger cost driver for us. People always say, well, what's other mandatory spending? Other mandatory spending means that you're automatically entitled to it if you trigger some mechanism. Unemployment compensation would be coming out of other mandatory spending. So those are other things. It's a whole host of things there, but that's what's other mandatory spending. When we look at what drives that debt and we go forward, we see, 2011, 2020, 2040. The entitlement spending is the blue. The other government spending is that orangish piece. The red piece is just the interest on the debt. And if we take a look at the interest on the debt alone, we see that rise fairly precipitously. This is just taking a look at the growth of the mandatory spending. The thing that's interesting to me in just doing some research and doing some of the polls, a vast majority of the American public believe that we spend about 25% on foreign aid. And when asked, how much do you think we should spend, they say, well, maybe only 10%. Well, we spend far less than that. And many of them think that we can balance our budget if we got rid of foreign aid and earmarks. But we have gotten rid of the earmark aspect. Foreign aid, though, I would argue, is actually dollars that are spent, I would say, wisely. But they allow us to be able to stretch those dollars and have influence abroad in areas that we want to have that influence, especially when we look at the unrest that's going on in the Middle East with the Arab Spring and other areas along those lines. When we look at what the real debt is, it's not the $14 trillion when we're up against the debt limit right now. If we look at our true liabilities, they're actually far greater than that. And so, if we look at it in 2008, the real debt number, according to the GAO, was about $55 trillion. It jumped in 2011 to be about $88.6 trillion. What that means for an average household of four is that that's a tax bill, in essence, to you, or an increase to you, about $282,000. If we look at the Simpson-Bowles Debt Commission, certainly Erskine Bowles, who was the chief of staff to President Clinton, who was one of the co-chairs of that, Alan Simpson, obviously a former senator from Wyoming, a Republican. So we had bipartisan there. And what he came out to say is that this debt is like a cancer. It's truly going to, in essence, eat the country from within. There's no question that this is a bipartisan thing, that we have to come and solve the problem that we have in terms of how are we going to tackle this crisis. Erskine Bowles actually, I was told, got into this because he wanted to save the country for his grandchildren. And then when he started to spend more time, he actually said, you know what, it's really more for my children. Because it was getting, that much more evident that the problem was more upon us. And in the end, he knows that he said that the reason why he's there and to stay on is because he's got to save it for right now. So let's go. If we do nothing, the historic debt, I argue, will lead to historic tax increases, which I would also argue will lead to historic unemployment. To reduce our debt, I think that we've got to talk about growth as well. We don't talk a lot about growth. You don't hear a lot about growth going on in Washington. I think it's absolutely critical that we talk about job growth in terms of how we get out of this mess. We need to be talking about how do we get more people back to work, how do we get more people that are going to be paying federal income tax, state income tax. These are the things that we have to do. For the folks that are just coming in the back, by all means, please come on in. There's a couple other seats that you can find up here, a couple more seats, a couple seats up front. So please, by all means, come on in. The other issues that I will say, the big problems that we face, the big problems that are out there. We're not going to solve these big problems without bipartisan support. I think that's just the way Washington works. It's just not going to happen unless you're able to get broad bipartisan support in order to try to address them. And then the other thing is that we need to fulfill our mission. Fulfill our mission to our seniors. When we talk about entitlements, or we talk about the things that are going to be the big drivers of our debt, I've said all along that two things have to happen. We need broad bipartisan support, and we have to keep our promises to our seniors. Without those two things, it's not going to happen. We've got to talk about jobs. Again, the number one thing in Congress today is jobs in the economy. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, when I ask my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, what's the most important thing to you? They usually respond, jobs in the economy. Well, we can all agree that it's jobs in the economy. I think that one of the ways that we can do it, as a small business owner myself, is we need to talk about empowering businesses, being able to allow them to forecast, being able to allow them to invest back in their businesses. And that's going to be one way that we can slowly start to get people back to work. There are 29 million small businesses in our nation. If we can create an environment where half of those businesses can create a single job, think about that. 2/3 of all net new jobs in our country are created by small business. How many small business people do we have in the room? Thank you so much for what you're doing. How we're getting out of this mess, it's going to be largely on your shoulders in terms of being able to get out higher into the economy. I think we need to fix the tax code. We've got the highest corporate tax rates in the world, but that's going to also require us also to take out the loopholes. And we have to take out those loopholes as well to broaden the base. We don't want to be able to be picking winners and losers in the federal government. I think that's the wrong approach. But right now, if we look at it, we do have the highest corporate tax rate. If we look at the Simpson-Bowles Commission, they argued that we should be lowering the corporate tax rate. The President of the United States has come around to say we need to lower the corporate tax rate. We live in a flatter world today than probably ever before. We're competing not just with Indiana and Wisconsin. We're competing with China, with India, with Singapore. We're competing with Taiwan. We're competing with Mexico and Canada as well. We have to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a situation where American businesses can grow and thrive. We want innovation to happen here in the United States, not elsewhere. It's not that we don't want it to happen elsewhere. We just want to make sure that innovation is happening here. I think we need to increase competitiveness for American manufacturers. In the 10th district alone, we've got 650 manufacturers representing 80,000 jobs. 650 manufacturers. We actually have one of the highest manufacturing districts in the country. And I bet most people probably didn't even know that. 10th district has one of the highest manufacturing districts in the country. I actually, yesterday, was with one of the administration's trade ambassadors talking about the free trade agreements with Korea, with Colombia, and with Panama. This is something that I think we need to push forward and do quickly, simply because it's going to enable our American manufacturers to be able to increase exports and become more competitive, and we'll see that happen. The President has said in the past that he wants to double exports by, I think, 2014. One of the ways that we have to do this is we've got to talk about agreements with our trade partners, our allies abroad, and that the free trade agreement certainly will do that. I think we need to talk about maximizing domestic energy production and an energy policy in Washington, D.C. I came out with Senator Kirk, maybe a month and a half ago, talking about some of the things that I think that we need to do. I think we need to do 4 things quite specifically, as everybody here in this room is impacted by high fuel prices. First thing that I think that we need to do is we have to put on the green light for those energy like wind, solar, hydroelectric, and the like. And all of those are set to expire in terms of tax policy in 2012, 2013. Give them a green light so that they continue to innovate. We also need to be talking about ending what I will call the fuel monopolies. There's 17 different blends around our country. Why aren't we picking out the cleanest